Now that you have identified several books and articles that are useful, your next step is to start reading them critically and to put them together into themes and issues that are going to be associated to your research problem. And I'm going to suggest some factors to analyze that are going to help see if those sources are reliable and if they're accurate. What are your author's credentials? Check out the institutional affiliation of where he or she works. What is the author's educational background, past research journals, writings, and experience on the topic? Is there a book or an article written on a topic in the author's area of expertise? And then you can use the various who's who publications for the United States and other countries and for some very specific topics, and then know the biographical information of your author's credentials to know if that individual is considered expert or credible enough to cite in your literature review. I also see if maybe your instructors mentioned particular authors that are relevant to your theoretical framework or to your research studies. Have you ever seen the author's name cited in other sources or bibliographies? Respected authors are usually cited frequently by other scholars because they are found to be the expert on that area of information, and they do a phenomenal job at reporting that data and getting it published. And so others will cite those works. And for this reason, I always note the names that appear in many of the different sources, and you might start finding a pattern that the same authors are reporting on the same topic, because essentially, as a professor, you become an expert in a particular methodology, a particular area of study, and you're going to be publishing that prolifically so that you are able to add knowledge to the discipline. And then I also just look at what basic values and goals of the organization or institution are. If I see a non-profit organization tied to an article, I might critically look at it and make sure, what's their views, who's backing them, why are they publishing, is it a credible source of information, uh, who belongs to that association, just to make sure I'm not setting myself up for reporting information that is inaccurate or biased. When was your source published? And this date's often located in the face of the title page, just below the name of the publisher. And if it's not there, you could look for a copyright date, maybe on the reverse of a title page. But on one page, the date of the last revision is usually at the bottom of the home page, and it's sometimes in the footer of that web page. And I look to see how current the information is. If the source is out of date, that might show me that it's not keeping current with the trends, the new research. Maybe it's already passe, and other new findings have been studied, and so that information is less relevant. And then on the other hand, sometimes if you're looking for historical information to provide a little bit of background, you might have material that's written many years ago, and then some new sources and databases and journals will actually give you the date for when the article was actually posted, month, day, and year. But I try to stay within about 10 years of a publication date unless it's really considered the seminal book or the article about your theory. So for example, I've mentioned in my master's thesis, I use the theory of planned behavior and the diffusion of innovations. Well, Rogers wrote the diffusion of innovations back 1950s, 1960s. We've had several versions, a new edition since then. So I needed to make sure I used the seminal work there. Same with Isaac Agin's theory of planned behavior. I made sure I cited several of his books and early research studies that go all the way back to the 1990s, just because I didn't want to miss a chance to set up my theoretical framework strongly and using the esteemed authors of those studies. I also want you to note the publisher. If the source is published by a university press or an academic association in which the professors belong to it, like the American Association for Agricultural Education, then it may be likely it's scholarly. If it's a publishing company for a textbook, I will look at the author and make sure it's legitimate. Although the fact that the publisher is reputable doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's good quality writing. So it does show that the publisher may have some high regard for the source being published if it's made through that peer review process and acceptance for publication. Is the source a scholarly or popular journal? And this distinction is important because it indicates the different level of complexity in writing and conveying ideas. And if you need some help being able to determine the type of journal, I like to look at CAS's magazines for libraries, and you can search journal titles to see whether it's a scholarly peer-reviewed journal or if it's a popular journal. I've also read an article that was titled Distinguishing Scholarly from Non-Scholarly Periodicals. I found it a long time ago as a graduate student, and it was very helpful in being able to distinguish whether the magazine Nature or Science was considered reputable enough for publication in some of my research, or as some other journals like the Journal of Applied Communications. Is that considered an esteemed publication for agricultural communicators? And helping to understand if I can trust that title of the journal. What type of audience is the author addressing? And if the publication is aimed at a specialized audience or a general audience, and is the source a little too elementary, or is it too technical, or is it just right for your needs? And I tend to find that most of the journal articles are written for academians and graduate students and are more scholarly with their language. And so that can kind of help you understand if that would be a credible, acceptable source to cite. And then based on these factors, I code my sources with one of three numbers. And I give it a 1 as a must-have source that I need to use in my literature review, and I set that in a pile, or I save it in a folder. And then I have my maybe sources. They're helpful, but I might check it a little bit later if I have the time and if I need some additional sources. And then I have my no pile. And it's absolutely irrelevant. I checked out the source and it turns out it just doesn't really fit with what I'm studying. And I keep all my sources organized. I save all of them as PDF files. I name all of them very specifically, and I keep my records. And that way I would be able to track my coding system. So you're saying, all right, how do I track my coding system? I give it the ranking inside the name. So I'll do like 1 underscore author's last name underscore maybe the first 2 words of the article, maybe the year of publication, and that keeps it organized. So if I know I have 1s, I have 2s, I have 3s, it's really easy to find my sources and keep them together. I do save all of my electronic sources and I back them up on an external drive. So in Google, I actually create these elaborate systems and I save all my files as first author, and then typically the first word or article book title to make sure I can easily find everything. And then I save the files on Google Drive, on USU Box, and then I have an external hard drive that backs up my computer every hour, just because I learned the hard way with a motherboard dying about 2 weeks before I did my dissertation defense. And I had everything saved and only lost 20 minutes of writing because I had a system in place. I'm going to take a moment and just exit out of the presentation and show you guys a little bit of what I'm talking about with my folder system. So if you ever work with me, you will know I absolutely value organizational systems. And this is how I organized my dissertation right here. And I had all my drafts of my chapters with every version I've ever written for my proposal. I kept all my dissertation items together. And then I had my literature review. And I just set it dissertation local foods. And then I had subfolders for every topic I was going to write about in my dissertation literature review. And so, for example, this topic right here is about community attachment. And you will see every article that I cited in Beggs, Hurlem, Haynes, 96, Brigham, Eisenhower, Knasch, 2004. This one is Brim, Weisenhauser, Crash, CA, Environmental Concern. So I use the title of the source with the author's last names. Here's the same from my CSA members. Author's names, first few words of the title. And I just kept this pattern throughout the entire thing because your literature review is going to be ongoing and revolving as a writing piece, and you're going to have to go back to your articles and be able to reread them, rewrite, find new things, be able to edit content, make sure your references are all correct. And if you have a really strong organizational system, you can share it with your people, and then you can keep yourself organized and I think save yourself a lot of time at the end of the process when you might need to be doing reference lists and referring to those sources. You have everything in front of you ready to go. And then if you do find some great textbooks, what I do is buy them if they're affordable. If I can't do that, I borrow from our library system, and there are times when our library system does not have a book that's available. So work with ILLIAD, is Utah State's interlibrary loan system, and you provide all of the information for the book you want to borrow and check out, and then the university has agreements with other institutions, and when a book is available, it will be sent for you to use here on campus or to your place of residence. You may even work with other library systems that are nearby, like community libraries. Surprisingly, we'll get a lot of great books that will deal with theoretical frameworks and methodology and statistics and things, because you can search your community system and then be able to borrow from there. A rough rule of thumb for the number of sources for a thesis proposal or for master's thesis is going to be somewhere between 25 articles and 50 articles. And I usually tell my graduate students that by the time we have a literature review written for a proposal, and certainly for the defense of the master's thesis, chapter 2, the literature review, is going to be between 25 and 30 pages in length.